Tonight, the government is open. That is not news. But Republicans made a bipartisan deal to dramatically expand spending, while they control both houses of Congress and the White House. And Democrats' leadership? Well, that's a whole other story. Let's start with a headline, too good to be true. Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer finding a deal. It funds the military, undoing the sequester, resolves children's health care for 4 more years, provides disaster relief to hard-hit parts of the country. But it also adds billions in spending and raises the debt ceiling through 2019. It was all going according to plan, but one man had other ideas.
Don't you remember when Republicans howled to high heaven that President Obama was spending us into the gutter, spending us into oblivion? And now Republicans are doing the same thing. How come you were against President Obama's deficits, and then how come you're for Republican deficits? Isn't that the very definition of intellectual dishonesty? When the Democrats are in power, Republicans appear to be the conservative party. But when Republicans are in power, it seems there is no conservative party.
I think it's an understatement to say his colleagues were upset with him for forcing them to vote at 2 in the morning. But Rand Paul has a point. Although he did vote for the massive tax cut that's also expected to add $1.5 trillion to the debt. It is the same point that many of his Republican colleagues made when they were swept into power 8 years ago in 2010.
Only in America are you ever given a second chance.
I've been chosen by the people of Indiana to stop reckless spending.
I think the American people grew frustrated with runaway federal spending and a tone-deaf Washington, D.C., really under both political parties.
We have a great opportunity here to demonstrate that we are responding to what the American people clearly would like for us to do. Cut the spending, cut the debt.
Get spending and debt under control.
They were screaming out loud, stop the spending.
I heard families tell me that as they sat across the kitchen table, they were struggling to keep their budget together. They said, won't you all do that too?
Every single one of the people you just saw who are still in elected office voted for the bill to increase spending. And by the way, we haven't even gotten to the president's $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan yet. That comes out tomorrow. Joining me now is Politico Magazine's chief political correspondent, Tim Alberta. Tim, you have spent a lot of time with one Mr. John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, who essentially cracked this deal on his way out the door. And now Republicans cut a deal to get rid of these spending caps. Can you help us put this in perspective? How big of a shift is this for Republicans?
Really important to contextualize all of this. So just in the House, when this budget bill passed, when this funding bill passed last week, you have 167 House Republicans voting for it. That's roughly 3/4 of the conference. And to think about specifically the 2010 class that you were referencing a minute ago, when these folks came in, there were 87 freshman House Republicans. Now, many of them have since left the Congress, but of those that remain, more than 30 of them voted in favor of this budget bill, and many of those folks...
That's right here. This is what you tweeted. This is the list of the 2010 Republicans?
Yes. Thank you for the free Twitter promotion. And many of these folks who voted for the bill were these same folks who 8 years ago were screaming from the high heavens about reckless spending, fiscal irresponsibility. And what made the 2010 wave feel so unique for those of us who covered it, those of us who remember it, was that these folks running for office were not just distancing themselves from the Democratic Party. They were distancing themselves from George W. Bush and the old Republican Party. That is what made 2010 feel like a watershed. They said, if you give us a chance, we will be a different kind of Republican Party moving forward. We will be conservatives first, Republicans second. And they have had now an opportunity to show with a unified government whether or not they were willing to stay true to that. And this bill, I think, more than anything else we've seen thus far, demonstrates the sort of intellectual dishonesty that Rand Paul was speaking about from the Senate floor.
Sam, can I ask you about Mitch McConnell in particular? I mean, he is somebody who is extraordinarily politically astute, typically. And I remember standing, at these Senate news conferences and asking him, are you ever going to vote for or agree to anything that lifts these caps? And he would always say, under no circumstances will I ever do that. And then, you saw him this week say, no, actually, this is a great deal.
I mean, this was, and Tim can correct me because he knows this stuff better, but it was a big talking point during the latter Obama years that they had put these caps in place because it was trillions of dollars in spending that was going to be reduced over the course of a decade, and that was a sure sign that they were committed to deficit reduction, even under a Democratic president. Of course, the skeptics said as soon as Obama was out of office, you guys are going to go back on your word, and sure enough, they have. And what's crazy about this is that it's all backwards from an economic standpoint. You want the stimulative spending, you want the tax cuts at a time where the economy is not doing well. It can be stimulative where you have high unemployment. What we're getting is a $1.5 trillion tax cut, trillions of dollars or hundreds of billions of dollars in more spending at a time when we have full employment. And if you ask any economist if this makes sense, they would say no, it doesn't.
I'm going to ask our producing team to put this poll that was just up on the screen back up, just because I want to underscore this point here, too, because I think that this is part of what McConnell is reflecting. What you're looking at is how many Americans think that reducing our budget deficit should be a top priority. And the trend line is going down and away from this. And, you know, quite frankly, Yamiche, this president is somebody who called himself the king of debt. I mean, it seems as though this may be yet another example of, you know, a party that believes one thing running into some trouble with the president that believes something else.
Yeah, the issue is that the president is the one that's going to be, I think there was a lot of question of whether or not President Trump was going to be someone who was going to lead the Republican Party. We're far gone. He obviously has taken over the party. He is obviously driving this. And I remember stories that we wrote at the New York Times where we were saying that Donald Trump is running to the left of Hillary Clinton in some ways. The idea that he's going to ask for trillions of dollars in infrastructure, the idea that he wants to spend trillions of dollars on all these different things explains to you why he's a different kind of Republican. And the fact that they also paid for this, they voted for this tax cut, shows you that these Republicans are really about what makes them look good. And the idea is, I think, that Donald Trump, as long as he wants it, he might get it from this Republican Party.
Tim, how much of this do you think is about, I mean, we've heard whisperings, at least from, or not even whisperings, we've heard Paul Ryan essentially say, we have to tackle entitlements in order to do this, and that's something that I want to do. Now, McConnell has said we're not going to do that this year, but is that kind of what this is about? Is it setting the stage, putting the pressure there to do something bigger?
I think in Paul Ryan's fantasy world, that's what it would be about, but I think this president, to Yamisha's point, has no interest whatsoever in sort of, from 30,000 feet, fiscal restraint, much less specifically rolling back entitlement programs. He was very specific on the campaign trail about not touching Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, so I think that would represent an enormous broken promise. And I think also, to the point a minute ago, Sam was talking about the Budget Control Act and how Republicans, especially during the early years of the Obama administration, made such a fuss out of making sure that they were trying to reduce federal spending. And in fact, part of Boehner's legacy that's probably underappreciated is that, in fact, there were subsequent years, consecutive years, where spending went down. I think now, when you have a unified Republican government, for anybody on the Hill, like Speaker Ryan or Leader McConnell, to say, well, look, guys, our hands are tied. We're working with a president who doesn't care about the debt, about the deficit, about entitlements. It's very disingenuous, because we heard a lot during the Obama years about Article 1 and the power of the purse and how Republicans were going to hold the Democratic executive branch accountable. They are not doing that same thing now, to Rand Paul's point. Yes. So there is just an enormous disconnect here between the rhetoric and the policy.
Yeah. Sophia, very quickly, last word.
Yeah, I think that Rand Paul is dead on, and the Republicans are spinning like a bunch of drunken sailors. As the Republican on the panel here, I can tell you my conservative horns come out on this. We are spinning ourselves into a problem for the next generation of Americans. I don't know how we're going to get them out of this kind of debt. I don't know what's going to happen to Social Security and other programs if we don't begin to tighten our belt, just like we have to do in our homes. It's a problem.
We should mention this to Mitch McConnell and Speaker Paul Ryan, who just signed on to this deal. Sophia Nelson, thank you so much.
It comes out every once in a while.